Okay, Erin, who just joined us, sorry about that, and Dawn and Liz and Kristen for being in Zoom space, but I'm glad we've all found each other. And yeah, great to start a meeting that we haven't had in a while with a Zoom miscommunication. So thanks for everyone's patience. So I'm going to call us to order at 6:10, and I may be going back and forth to check email to see if anyone else is looking for me. So or looking for us. So if I could get a minute taker from one of our board members, that would be great.
I can do that. Kristen.
Great. Thank you, Kristen.
Sorry about that.
And if you just want to make a copy of the agenda, do you have a version you can do that with, or I can send that to you?
No, I've got it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just start with public comment. And I think all of us are active committee members. And is it Margie or Margie?
It's Margie with a hard G.
Margie. Okay, nice to see you. So yeah, this is the time for public comment, and we'll do that again at the end. Otherwise, you're welcome to listen in, and there may be other opportunities to chime in, but feel free if you have anything to share right now.
Okay, I don't, because I looked over what seemed like what you were tasked to do by the board, which seemed like interesting things and important things to do. But I am from Starksboro, and I just want to do anything I can to become more, to understand what's happening at the level of MAUSD and the community that affects the Starksboro School, so that I can do whatever I can to help the school in the way that I think is important. That's all. So I'm just here to really see what you do.
Great, thank you. John, can I ask you to send Dave Sharp our new link? I think I can't minimize the screen when I'm recording, but I'm checking my emails on my phone of folks who are looking for us. So it's in the email I sent to the committee on the 30th.
Okay, I'll do that.
And then it looks like Coco is looking as well. So if you're able to just send it to both of them, that would be great. Okay, so our first order of business is to approve our minutes from June 1st, which seems like a while ago. So if I could get someone to make a motion to approve those from the board, that would be great. Liz, thank you. And a second. Kristen? Okay. Anything to discuss on the minutes? All right, hearing nothing, I'm everyone in favor of approving the minutes, just raise your hand. Great, okay, thank you. Okay, so Margie, your comment / question was a good one, because I wanted to reset our group a little bit, or not necessarily reset, but kind of reboot, because we haven't met since June, and we all know a lot has been happening, but this group hasn't convened since that time, and I thought it would be good to remind us all how this committee is designed to work and what our purpose is. Hey, Coco, sorry about that Zoom space. And I think we have somebody else who should be coming as well. Let me pause though before I do that. Coco, we did have a moment for public comments, so I want to offer you that opportunity if you have anything right now.
I'm okay. Thank you, Krista.
Okay. Okay, so we're an interesting committee, and we have a mixed group of board members and community members. And when we formed, that was deliberate. We wanted, there was a lot of energy in the community around the proposed bond vote to renovate Mount Abe, and a group of folks, some of whom are here this evening, were part of a convening, a regular convening of people interested in talking about the future directions of our schools. But that group was not, didn't have a direct conduit to the board. And around the same time, we were a newly unified school board and recognizing that we needed to have a more deliberate way to stay connected to our community and also to provide opportunities for input. And so when we formed this committee, we decided to have it be a board committee, but open to community members. And I think that's been incredibly helpful. I think we've done some really good work over the past 3 or so years since we formed, maybe even longer. And the input and the hard work and the perspective of this group has been really appreciated. The focus of our group is really on ensuring that we're communicating effectively and accurately and in a timely manner all the things that are happening. And so to that end, this group helped to craft a board communication structure that the board then adopted. And then our other charge is to make sure we're providing opportunity, different sorts of opportunity for community input. And so we've also done a lot around that, hosting lots of conversations in the fall of 2019, hosting virtual town halls in December of 2019, I think it was. And we continue to do that work. And that's, I think, a lot of our focus right now as so much is going on, or that will be a focus of our work now as so much is going on in the moment around the future of our district. And so we, I think, also have another goal, which is to look beyond engaging in input in this particular or around these particular circumstances and ensuring that the board is also thinking about regularly checking in with our owners, as we call them, or the people, the taxpayers of the district, to make sure that what we've set out as our end goal for students to achieve when they graduate, to make sure that that is that folks agree with that ends policy or that goal, and to regularly have a way to check in with people about that. So that's sort of kind of how we work. It can be tricky sometimes because like most board members, folks that want to get involved in the work of the schools usually have a real interest in being directly involved and sometimes a particular position. And sometimes that is in agreement with what we as a board want to do, and sometimes it's not. And so a lot of times we'll make recommendations to the full board and they'll incorporate some or all. And sometimes, it's a mixing of ideas. So I really personally appreciate the perspective that this group offers. And so we try to be a little more relaxed with our public input, especially when we have a smaller group. It's easier to do that. When we do have a really big group, it's a little harder because we do have things we need to get done. But I just appreciate those of you that have been in this work for a while and glad you keep showing up. So, because it's not easy. So that's just a little bit about our work and our purpose. And Dave, hey, it's good to see you. And I'm sorry about the Zoom miscommunication.
Yeah, I'm in finally. Thank you.
Okay. So I was just going over kind of the purpose and focus of this committee as we get started again. And I should say that it's not that we haven't been doing anything over the summer. We, a smaller group of us, primarily Kim and Nancy and I, with some help from some other folks, have been working on content to go out through the Addison Independent in a column that this group proposed would be a good idea. And so, so that happened over the summer, but this is really our first meeting.
So is it too late to make any comments?
Go ahead.
So I've begun to respond to a number of people who write me or meet me on the streets or give me a call and express their fear that their school is going to close or this is all going to be terrible. And I understand those fears. However, I have begun to tell people that what would be really helpful, what would be really good, particularly in meetings like this one and our board meetings, is for people to turn away from fear and towards doing what's best for our children. And that has many facets, and it's a very complicated, difficult answer. But we'll get to a much better place and better answers if we come together about the positive things of what might be, what might the future look like if it's best for our children, rather than operating from fear.
Thank you, Dave. So I wanted to move into sharing a little more in detail and update on some of the work that's been happening behind the scenes, specifically with Nate Levinson and his team. But before I do, I just wanted to pause and see if anyone had anything to add or questions or thoughts about the scope of this group and how it works. And yeah, go ahead, Kristen, and then Nancy.
So yeah, I've been getting a lot of communications too from people, Dave, that just don't understand the Nate Levinson thing at all. And so I think despite you guys doing the communications, somehow the message isn't getting out, and people are thinking that, I don't even know what they're thinking. It's a lot of different things that aren't exactly anything to do with what he's doing. So I just wanted to bring that up, that when we get to the communication piece here, I think we need to do even more communicating, because I got some sort of just interesting takes from people on what they think that is, and what the purpose of it is, and what the process of it is, and that none of which is accurate. And so anyway, it's discouraging, because you guys have been doing a great, and I couldn't participate in the summer. I apologize. I was too busy, but you guys have been getting that out. And yeah, some people just don't understand it at all, and think it's various different things that it's not. So anyway, I just want to put that out there, that a lot of people are confused about it and sort of making stuff up about it, and it's not good. There's no common base of and even when people read what you guys have put out, they still don't understand it at all. And that's not your problem, because I think it's clear, but so there's a problem.
Nancy?
I just want to say a couple of things. One is to respond to what Dave just said. Dave, and everyone, I absolutely agree that the focus needs to be on what's best for kids. And I think where we have run into trouble is that there's a real difference of opinion about what is best for kids. I mean, but I just want to be very clear that when I hear people very concerned that their elementary schools might be closed, there's certainly, that concern is about a belief about what's best for kids. And so, although it isn't always characterized that way, I sometimes hear the superintendent say, if I have to choose between what's best for a community and what's best for kids, I'll always choose what's best for kids. Well, in this case, the passion that board members are hearing and the fear is a fear about losing what people believe is best for kids. It isn't about my property values are going to go down if we, I mean, it is, there certainly are issues about what a community would lose, but the passion comes from what people believe about what's best for kids. So I did want to say that. And the other thing I wanted to say in terms of moving forward and the historical perspective that Krista just provided, I just don't, I know that you may think this is crazy to bring up and not timely, but when this group started way back in the beginning, one of the things that we tabled for the time being was the idea of establishing school councils for every school. And part of that was wanting to make sure that even in the midst of consolidation and even in the midst of policy governance, it would be possible for the voices of people in communities to be heard and to get to the board somehow. And also that it would be possible to have conversations that would help people understand things that the board is doing and through getting together and talking about it. So school councils may not be something we feel we can take on right now, although I'm not convinced it wouldn't be a good time to try. But I just don't want to leave that tabled forever, because it was a may but not a shall that appeared in the original Articles of Agreement, and it was there for a reason.
Sorry, I think I hit mute. I'm pretty sure that if I'm recording, I can share my screen, but the question is if I can find what I want to share while I'm recording. So let me see if I can figure that out, because it's telling me I can't minimize my screen. There we go. Okay. So I want to dive in a little bit more into some of what we've started to talk about, and I think it is helpful to look more closely at what's happening and people's perspectives of that, and to talk through some of that here. And then that, I believe, helps us to figure out how to share that with others. I didn't lose you guys, did I? Nope. Okay, there we go. All right, so I just threw this little slide together with what is a timeline for the work that we've undertaken with Nate Levinson. And so let's see if I can. Okay, so I can see a couple people. Nancy, do you see this? Okay. All right, so this is a timeline that we've shared out in a column. We've shared in a couple of other ways, but I think it's really good. I keep coming back to it to be reminded of what we're doing and why and what's happening in each step of this process. And I just want to remind us all how we got to working with Nate in the first place, because I think it's an example of something we should be proud of, which is that we heard after Patrick Green put forth a potential option for us to consider with our facilities planning. We heard, a lot of folks did not like that proposal, but also some folks, specifically, I think it was the Lincoln Select Board, who first came to us to say, can we put forth an alternative? And we, as a board, we pivoted and we said, okay, let's do that, but let's hear not just from one community. Let's open this up to the larger community for anyone who has an idea they wanted to flesh out with us, or flesh out and share with us. So we did that call for proposals, and we put forth some criteria that we thought would be helpful in guiding the conversation and figuring out what we would need as a board to be able to compare those proposals against each other and against the superintendent's proposal. But I think we, and other board members can chime in here too, but I think we realized that we needed help with that, because this was a big task, that there were, that it would be hard for us as a board to maybe offer a really objective perspective on these proposals. And we weren't quite sure how to build a real tangible structure and framework to try to evaluate them in a fair, unbiased apples to apples comparison. And so that's how we came to working with Nate and his team. And so he put forth this scope of work that he thought would be helpful to us in working through these proposals. And part of that, and so you can see what he and his team, the review team, have done so far, is to meet with the authors of each of the proposals, to provide a summary of what they entailed, and there's been back and forth communication with authors of the proposals around that summary. So he's accepted feedback and made some changes based on that feedback. As he and his team create this common presentation template. The board has not seen that yet. The next step in the process is this community input committee. And this is where we are now and where there's a lot of concern and confusion, I think, in the community. And I'll just say from my perspective, I understand some of where I think the concern and confusion comes from. And Nate spoke to this at our retreat when he said that, you know, some of what he's recognizing is the many places where there's disagreement or confusion around a variety of things, you know, everything from what's the condition of Mount Abe to what are our enrollment numbers going to be to how do we project per pupil spending. So many different places where we as a community and the proposal authors and the board and the superintendent are not in agreement. There's no common ground. And that has just led to a lot of mistrust. And so he said to us at the retreat that, you know, our job is to help with some of that, but it's also the board's job. And you guys have a lot of work to do still. And so we recognize, I personally will say, I think that's part of where the confusion and consternation comes in. And we still have work to do to build some of that trust that will maybe help when we share out information about things like this community input committee. Nevertheless, this committee, it's designed to work with Nate and his team to look more closely at the criteria that we put forth as a board and to see if any of these criteria need to be made more specific or elaborated on, or if they are inclusive of everything that the community and that the proposals and that the board deem is important. So for example, there's something in our call for proposals that talks about incorporating our core values that we developed in the fall of 2019. But it doesn't specifically call out town schools, but yet that's clearly really important to every proposal author. So, so I think was concern that we were creating a whole new system of criteria for proposal authors to then have to tailor their proposal to. And I think actually what the goal is that this committee will help provide a little more clarity. And so the board and so Nate and his team provided some recommendations of what that committee could look like. Something he has spoken about consistently is the need to really have a lot of involvement from building principals, that they are trusted community advisors, that they are on the ground, really know exactly what's happening in their schools, that that we have to find a way to have their deep involvement. So right off the bat, you know, he and his team encouraged us to make sure they were all a part of this committee. And then beyond that, we wanted to have some representatives from each of the towns. And, you know, we didn't want this to be a formal board committee that we had to limit in scope or purpose. And we didn't want to get into a situation where we were choosing people as a board to serve on this committee, because that felt like maybe not the best thing for us to do right now. And so we chose to have it be folks that are interested can apply, and then there'll be a lottery drawing. And so this group of folks is not expected to have really deep knowledge. That's what the principals are there for. They're not expected to have the huge systems understanding or financial modeling. That's what Nate and his team are there for. But they're there to just sort of listen and offer community members thinking around these criteria that the board had set out, and to see if there is more information that would be helpful to deepen the way the proposals are evaluated. So, and I think it's important to note that after this committee meets, I think they're meeting 2 or 3 times, then they're going to share their thinking with the board and with the building principals, and the board will adopt or maybe decide to make some changes to that before those criteria are formally adopted. I want to pause there because I'm doing a lot of talking, and I've only gotten us through August, but I think it's important that we kind of all have a basic understanding of what what the process is as I understand it, and also if others that have been sitting through these meetings with Nate have anything else to add. I can't see everybody, so just unmute yourself if you have a question or want to add anything.
I think
I-
that,
Kristen
sorry.
and then Nancy.
sorry, I just think that in Moncton, I would almost like to post this on Front Porch Forum again, because people were asking, what am I applying for? What is this thing? And so I think if you could send me this anyway, I think a lot of people in Moncton at least would like to see this in conjunction with the other invitation that we sent out for joining this committee. Or a link to this if it exists anywhere that could be, maybe not everyone wants to read this obviously, but and I could put that out again with a link to this if we could put it on our website. I think there's enough people interested that might be a good thing to do.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, and when we move down a little bit more in the agenda, maybe we can talk about like this or what else, or in addition, what can we do to provide ongoing clarity for folks? Nancy?
I did see someone from Moncton was questioning why turn anyone away who volunteers for this committee. And I can certainly see why Nate and his team might be worried about having a cast of thousands, although I suppose one could say that would be a happy problem. And I can sort of see why they want to balance the numbers according to the population in each town. But I do want, the letter I saw did make me wonder about the wisdom of limiting the numbers with a lottery. So I don't know if that is something that Nate is willing to reconsider, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knew about it.
Yeah, and I don't know where we're at with, I think people are just expressing their initial interest, and I don't know if we'll have a check-in with Nate again before that first meeting, but I would imagine we would. Maybe Dawn, you have an idea, and maybe that's something we can, it might be that there are 18 people, in which case we can be, he could be flexible about that. It might be that there are 25, and that would make for a hard group to navigate. I don't know. But I'll make a note of that. Maybe we can come back to that.
I mean, my experience of Nate, I can just say is that, at least because, as you know, I'm one of the proposal for one of the proposals, I'm a co-author. And what Herb and I have found is that if we have a question, or if we feel like we need to have a meeting with Nate and his team, he jumps to it. I mean, he's happy. He's quite responsive. And so if there's something to be said to him, even though there isn't a scheduled meeting with him, I'm sure the message can get through easily.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. The other thing I wanted to say, and I guess this is sort of laid out in this timeline, but just to be really clear that, and I think this is something our group will probably have a role in thinking about. This is all just building up to a report that Nate is going to share with the board, and then that will be shared with the community. And so that's really when there'll be ample opportunity for an unlimited number of folks to provide perspective and feedback after they see this report. So in other words, it's not the role of the community input committee to evaluate proposals, and that will happen community-wide in what I hope will be a pretty robust way.
And I think that's where people from the community were thinking that we were only going to allow 2 people from each town to have input on the final product, is what people were
Right.
confused about, instead of this small but important slice of the process. And people were thinking that that more reflected on the final product.
Yeah.
And I tried to explain that that's not the case. So again, that I think there's a slice of the community that is feeling like that's very undemocratic to only have 2 people on this committee. And then I tried to explain it's a small piece of the process and not the final part where everyone will be able to have comment and input.
So once this criteria is adopted, in addition to that evaluation criteria, Nate, I think already has begun the work with the business office to figure out the financial modeling of the different proposals. And something that that they're trying to build in, which I think is really important and incredibly helpful, is the option to have I'm not a spreadsheet whiz, but you can have a cell with a formula that can be tweaked with a range of different values, so that there's the ability to put different projections in for a number of variables. And I think most of those variables relate to some of the places where there has been a lack of common understanding. And so I think that's really helpful. I think it's a model that could be really useful to our district always, besides just this moment, to have not a static way to evaluate the financial impacts of different decisions that we might make. And so that's also in the works. And then you can see in October, so originally we were expecting to hear a report from Nate in December, and now I think it's sounding like they may be able to provide that in November, which is great. And so they're going to work on this draft report. It's going to go back to the proposal authors. It's going to go to the board. It's going to go to this community input team. It's going to go to the principals. So multiple points for vetting of both criteria and this report. And as they did with the original summary of proposals, there's I think taking in a feedback and making adjustments is needed. So, and that will result in this final report, which is not really going to share a best option. It's more just here's how these different options play out. Any other questions, comments, concerns about this update or what's happening right now?
Krista, one of the questions that I keep getting is how the Lincoln vote to withdraw affects this process. And it feels to me like it needs to be addressed in some kind of communication to the community if we know. And what does it mean in terms of the looking at criteria? If the town wants to withdraw, how do we evaluate? Do we evaluate as a 5-town district, the proposals? Do we evaluate it as a 4-town district? And because the vote hasn't happened within the time frame before this process is going to play out, that's the question that a lot of people I've been talking with have been asking.
I think that, Krista, isn't the district sort of figuring out what that means at this point? I don't think we as a board have heard anything yet, because that happened the night of our last meeting. And so our next meeting is in 2 weeks, right? So I'm sure that we will get information about that then, Kim. It's very germane, absolutely. And so I think that a lot of that information will be presented, and in 2 weeks, and then we can look at that. I mean, also, maybe again, the decision that is made of what to put forward, we don't know what that's going to include, and Lincoln doesn't know what that's going to include. So that's why it might have been good to wait until this process was over. But I mean, people feel like they need to do what they have to do when they do it. So
Well, and I think I'll just add it is creating a lot of, I mean, that is certainly contributing to the confusion. And so in terms of communicating, and it just sounds like the board hasn't really had a chance to discuss what that means in this particular process. But I feel like that's a really important piece of information that we will have to share with folks, because it'll be really difficult for people to wrap their heads around this process, given the fact that, one of the 5 towns wants to leave the district. So does that make the proposals, are they still valid proposals? I've read most of them, but again, how does that decision affect this whole process? And I think it needs to be addressed when the board comes up with an answer. So as part of the community engagement committee and providing information, this is good, but it's just, there's a big missing piece to this information for a lot of people.
I don't
Something,
know if I understand what the question is. I guess maybe it's 2 different questions. Tell me if I'm right about this. The one question is, should a town that has voted to withdraw and is in the process of trying to find out if it will be able to withdraw, which is a multi-step, multi-month process that involves not just the other towns agreeing to let them go, but then the state board agreeing that it's okay for them to go. And then, there are multiple steps after that. Should a town in that situation, in the midst of a process like that, be part of the process that Nate Levinson and his team have designed with the board? And I guess I would say, absolutely, that town is part of the district.
Yeah, no, that wasn't one of the questions.
Okay.
It was how does that vote influence this process?
So how does it influence the process? You mean, Kim, because the proposals assume 5 towns in the district,
Yeah,
and suddenly there might not be.
yeah, the criteria itself is changing.
right. So,
I agree with you. I mean, that, the town is still in the district and will be for a couple of years, I don't know what the timeline is, but a lot of people keep asking, how does this influence this process? And and people have even said, does it make sense to go forward with this process? Because a lot of the parameters, 20% of our district, or one of our 5 towns, is choosing to leave. So it just, I think for us to go through, and I know that we've invested the money and the time and the energy in this, but I think there's a lot of people out in the community that just sort of feel like, well, where are we now as it relates to making a decision about the future of our district, if in fact it's going to change?
I think I can offer a little clarity. One of the variables that Nate spoke about being able to tweak is numbers of schools, and if this school is in and this school is out. I think the goal is to have the chance to look at these proposals at face value, and also given changing circumstances. One of those changing circumstances is which schools are, how many elementary schools do we have in the district, or what's the student population? So I think that's important to know. I think that's probably important to share out, and it may be that we share that out around the same time as we share out what we might learn about the different impacts to the district should a town secede. I don't think we'll have that until at least the 14th. So that might be, we might have some, it sounds like it might be helpful to share some info, at least about the community input committee before that time, but I could see that being the next communication we get out. One thing that
I just want to add one other thing that that a lot of people are talking about is how does that affect the merger talks? If a town were to leave and we lost those kids or couldn't count on those kids for the middle and high school, then what does it look like? How does that affect the merger conversation? And can we as a district sustain a middle and high school without knowing for sure if kids in the district would attend, or do we just take that off the table and evaluate the proposals as they are? But my understanding is those proposals have school choice in them. So high school choice. So, I think people too, and I'm just, not only are they talking about it now, but as we get further and further through the fall, that these things are going to converge. And I just think it's really important that we sort of lay out the specifics of what's happening, where the board is in its whatever decision, they need to make, or influence in the process, and then also the timeline for everything. And I wanted to ask if that timeline that you shared, Krista, is on the website. If it's currently on the website.
That's a good question.
Yeah, because that would be a good timeline. I think the timeline for the merger study committee would be really good. And then also the timeline around a possible withdrawal vote for the district. And I think those are three really big things that if people can kind of see and understand how the timing of everything is going to affect each of the other.
What was the third thing, Kim, that you said? What?
Timing of a vote.
The withdrawal vote by the four other towns.
Oh,
And the merger study timeline, and then Nate's timeline.
So it's a little tricky, I think, with the vote for towns to secede, because I don't, believe that's in the hands of the towns to schedule, and there isn't a set timeline by which they need to do that.
they are working on that.
Okay, great. So I think, our messaging can be maybe a mix of, these are the trajectories as we know them, but they are, it's hard if you want to know exactly how this is all going to roll out, because I don't think we know exactly how it's all going to roll out. But clearly, ongoing communication is really helpful and important. And something that we struggle with, what I have struggled with, is the need to get information out in a really timely manner, and also to make sure it's really accurate. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get that to happen. I was trying to remember, Kim, and I feel like we're sort of shifting into this next agenda item, which is great with me, as long as other folks are good with that, as we're talking about what information we want people to know. But getting the column, I think, has been great, because it provides text that we can then put out in Front Porch Forum and send out to families in our school newsletters. And we try to that gets posted to the website as well. But it takes. I was trying to remember, Kim and Nancy, what's like our turnaround time usually? I write the draft, and when is it finalized? I mean, it's at least a week, I feel like. Is that accurate? 2 weeks? Yeah. So I think,
as long as we get all the fact checking and everything done, the same week, because the deadline is Monday for the space and Tuesday for the copy. So
Right.
if the timing isn't quite right, then it sort of feels like 2 weeks. But it can
Right.
be done in a week if it happens at the beginning of the week before.
I'd just like to comment on something that was discussed earlier about towns deciding to withdraw. That can happen at any time. Could happen today. It could happen 3 years from now, after a decision has been made in terms of what the district's going to look like, whether there's a merger with Addison Northwest, or whether anything ever moves forward with high school in Middlebury. Whether there's a supervisory union structure that has Lincoln part of the supervisory union again, and the high school kids come to Mount Abe. I mean, there's just a myriad of possibilities. And at any time, a town can vote to withdraw. That's what puzzled me a whole lot about what was going on in Lincoln, and I thought it was very premature. And I hope Starksboro doesn't act prematurely as well. There's plenty of time if the district settles on a plan that the community doesn't like, for that community to vote to withdraw. So I think thinking that there's some sort of deadline that the community has to vote to withdraw before something else happens is a false assumption.
Dave, I'd like to believe that what you've just said is the case, but I must say, I don't think Lincoln has been convinced, and I don't believe Starksboro, to name 2 towns, has been convinced that their right to vote on whether or not to close or substantially close their school through repurposing. I don't believe many people in those 2 towns are convinced that right is will be preserved, both certainly in the case of a merger of governance, where if it were voted in, it would be attended by changing the Articles of Agreement, which at the moment we believe protects the towns from closure without a vote. So in that case, that's a concern for those, certainly for those 2 towns. And another area of concern is the question of whether the legislature is going to close the loophole, the so-called loophole that exists around withdrawing. I mean, that's a great concern, especially in the context of a district that's talking about closing smaller schools. I mean, so, it might feel to you that it was premature in the case of Lincoln, or that it would be premature in the case of Starksboro. But the timelines for withdrawing are long, and the language in Act 46 is not always as clear as it might be. And so I think people needed to move when they thought that their school, which they believe is so important for kids, might be closed. I mean, I'm not sure it was premature.
Well, you should check with your lawyer and the lawyers at the Department Agency of Education. But a town withdrawing from a school district is addressed in laws preceding Act 46 and having nothing to do with Act 46. So if a town wants to leave a supervisory union or leave a school district, that's covered by laws other than Act 46. And I don't believe that it's obstructed by Act 46 or or even if the superintendent's plan went into force as is, whether Starksboro or New Haven or Moncton could say at that point, we want out. I think that's covered by separate law, but you should probably check with a lawyer to
Yeah.
verify whether I'm speaking
Yeah, I
correctly.
mean,
or not.
I have, and I will. So thanks. I mean, it's helpful to know your thinking on that.
I think probably for our purposes, we need to try to provide as much clarity as we can around the processes that we're involved in and, keep it at that level. And because there is, there's just a lot of differing of opinions and also a lot of emotion around those. So I think what I'd like to do is just stay focused on what's most important for our community to know about.
Yep.
In this next piece that we hope to get out, so today's the 7th, and if we give ourselves that 2 weeks, it would come out probably shortly after our next board meeting, maybe before if we're fast. It would not address the questions about an impact of a town secession, but it could provide clarity around the things we know now about the Community Input Committee and some of Nate's work. So if I could shift us back to thinking about two pieces of our two communication opportunities coming up in this month. What do we think is most important for people to know in this first one? Some of the things I've written down, clarity, whether it's that timeline that I shared or some other narrative that really speaks specifically to the Community Input Committee. Something else I wrote down that I think could be really helpful, I'd like to know other people's thoughts, is more information about the financial modeling that Nate and his team are going to be doing, especially with respect to some variables that can be adjusted. Those are the two things I have.
One thing I'm wondering about, and this may be too big of a chunk for us to take on, but maybe not, is, I've been thinking about some weeks, months ago, Caleb Elder wrote a piece in the Addison Independent about how dramatically things had changed from the time from the beginning of last school year to the time he was writing the article. And it, and among the things that have changed are things that greatly affect the finances of the school district. And it isn't just the influx of ARPA money, but it's a disappearance for at least another year of the threshold, and all kinds of other things. And so I'm just wondering if the board and the community would benefit from having information about how the finances of the school district have changed in a year, how the picture has changed. I'm imagining that the superintendent feels and the board feels they have more time because of some of the changes that have happened, but I don't think the community is well versed on that.
So if I could add too, for the last 3 or 4 months, I haven't done the monthly thingamajigger, partly because of family issues, but also because you guys were doing the thing in the newspaper. And normally I would cover that because it has been explained by Patrick at some of the meetings, just how some of that is. So I'm going to propose that I take up those things again, because they address, everything at the meeting, everything that sort of those kind of issues. So I can certainly take that on we won't get all that much information about that at our next meeting because it's focused on facilities, but we will, because we're also going to be starting budget stuff. And people have been asking me to do that again. We've done that the last 2 times there's been during the budget process, to really share that so people can feel like they can understand it more and be a bit bigger part of it. So that will certainly all be coming out in the next few months, Nancy, in regard to the current budget, because Patrick always talks about what we were expecting, what we're seeing, worst case scenario, middle, best case scenario, and that involves discussion of all those other monies too. So that's coming up. I don't even think we know the extent to which they're probably learning it now as they prepare to do the budget. So I think that's a great idea, and I will start doing that again because I think your articles have been sort of focusing on the facilities piece, and there's all these other things happening too.
Mhm.
So we need to get back to that communication also.
Mhm.
But it's coming up, and I think they're just discovering all that, Nancy, and how it's going to affect this year's budget. And then when Patrick's doing that, he also, gives any gleanings he can towards the following budget too. And what he usually actually, at some point in the process, shows us sort of the current one we're working on, and then how that projects out to the next one. That's part of the budget process. So that should help figure out how much time are we getting and all that sort of thing. If I don't know, because we don't have that data yet.
We could even reference in a column around facilities planning that as part of our budget process, we will be doing some of that. Look back at where we were and look ahead at where we imagine going, based on different things that have shifted from when we last did a budget. And I wonder if any of those pieces of things that shift, and I was saying before that I really like this idea of this financial modeling, not just for this process, but for any long-term projecting, to be able to move these numbers around a little more easily to see what things might look like if X happens or Y doesn't happen.
Right. A way to try out the different assumptions
Yeah.
in the financial model.
Yeah. Not to put folks on the spot, but a couple people we haven't heard from. I'm just wondering what folks think about what's been talked about so far, and also what, if you were out in the community, what you'd want to make sure you got clarity around or heard about. Erin Buckwalter.
Yeah, I would just say that I feel like, just representing Starksboro and what I'm hearing here, I think a lot of people have questions about the timeline with which withdrawal would need to happen if the town should decide that. And I think this conversation, about what Dave was saying, getting clarity on that would be a helpful thing for many people in Starksboro as this conversation continues, and people are wondering, if at some point it would be harder or impossible to withdraw from the district. So I think that's something that I don't know how much this group needs to respond just to Starksboro, but that's definitely a question that I'm hearing specifically in Starksboro from a lot of people.
Can I just ask a follow-up question, Erin? Are you thinking about that just in terms of how long a typical process like that would take, or in terms of how it relates to the work with Nate or the merger study committee?
I think more specifically the merger study committee. I mean, my understanding has been that if the merger study committee proposes a merger and rewrites the articles in a way that would preclude a town vote, which is currently in the articles, that would change the kind of the ability for Starksboro to potentially withdraw. And I think that is, for some people, that is an assumption that is being made. And so I think understanding if that's true, I think the board being able to say, here are the instances with which a town could withdraw. It could happen at this point, this point, this point, in 1 year, in 2 months, in 5 years, like having a scope of what that looks like. I think, I think Lincoln moved when it did because they felt like that was potentially not going to be open to them in the future. And so I think many folks in Starksboro are assuming that because Lincoln did that, that is also something that Starksboro would need to do should folks in town feel like that is the right direction to go. So I think that's a question that I'm hearing people ask about the timeline and, what that would mean. And I think it's an interesting question to hear that there are potentially differences of opinion, and maybe there just are legally, and it's an unknown. But if there is a more clear answer, I think it would be beneficial for the board to communicate that to the town. Because I feel like right now there is kind of a maybe this is my reading is kind of like a trust me, just wait kind of like let's see how this plays out. And I think there are some folks that don't feel trustful, and so that idea of just waiting is like, well, I don't know if we want to do that. So
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarity. And something I was going to say earlier, and you just reminded me of it, was that so we don't have anybody. Oh no, actually, Dave, you are on the merger. You're on the merger study committee. But having a little bit of a, maybe there's a place to have a little bit of a synopsis of what the committee is working on in this column as well, or what, I don't know. Brad Johnson, after the first meeting, shared some notes with the board of the meeting, like kind of like minutes, but not official minutes, just his notes. And I attended the most recent meeting, and it was really helpful. But for folks that are not going to read the full minutes or watch the meeting, but just want to have some general sense of the conversation happening around some of these topics, maybe a little bit of a, some text dedicated to that would be helpful as well. So maybe Dave, we could talk about that after this.
Yeah, I would definitely think that would be helpful. I feel like I know more about what's going on with Nate than I do
Right.
about the merger study committee. And so I think that many people in the community are probably in a similar situation. And I think for many of us that live on the further side of the district, the merger is a little bit scary because it's far. So that's something that I'd love to know about.
And I don't know if there's a plan for how they're going to communicate out what they're working on with the greater community, but that doesn't mean we couldn't glean from pieces of that and add that to our column. The Nate work is something that is just our districts alone, and Dawn and I and Patrick, we are meeting with them, so it's easier for me to share that insight. So I think would be helpful to have that with the merger study committee as well. Okay, Coco, thanks for being patient.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the points that I keep hearing questions and comments on is the complexity of the merger study committee as it relates to the Nate Levinson process. From what folks have gleaned in communities, the merger study committee does sort of operate independently of both the Addison Northwest and the MAUSD board. So if they were to recommend some kind of merger, right, a full merger, who knows? I think there's still uncertainty about exactly how much leeway that 706 committee has in terms of their recommendations, how creative they can be with it, or if it really is merger or not a merger. That recommendation, how that relates to then the work of Nate Levinson and the MAUSD board, how those could come together in December or January or February, whenever that timeline lines up, there's confusion and rightfully so around the complexity of those two decision-making processes that are happening. Is that clear? I mean, I think it's hard to articulate the sort of nuances there that I keep hearing in community discussions. But you know, if the Nate Levinson committee brings forward, you know, that conversation with the committee Nate's formed and community members and the board brings forward a proposal, all of the proposals that are on the table besides the December 7th proposal do not recommend mergers with Addison Northwest. So I think, you know, there's confusion around that, and in part too, because it feels like the board has sort of jumped ahead with this merger study committee before really engaging in the proposal process. It's like one proposal has kind of jumped up in line and gone to phase 2, while all of the other proposals are still sort of stuck in this holding pattern with the committee and the work with Nate Levinson.
Thanks, Coco. Go ahead, Dave.
Sure, I think it probably would be helpful if the public knew more about what the merger committee was doing. So the consultant put forth, just for everybody's information here, the consultant put forward, I think it was 5 different options. The simplest is the one that many are assuming is the only option, and that is that we form one school district that includes all 10 towns, both high schools and middle schools, all in one school district with one school board. That's the
All right.
simplest.
Dave, just to clarify, you mean the consultant that is working with the merger study committee, Tracy Rand.
Rand.
This
Yeah.
is not Nate.
This is not
Or-
Nate. Yes, for
Okay.
clarity, yes. So, and the other end is pretty complicated, and it envisions returning to a supervisory union structure. There are, I think, 2 or 3 different ways a supervisory union structure could be put together. You could have the supervisory union. Many of you remember a supervisory union from when we had one before Act 46, and that's where each town had its own elementary school district, and the high school had a school district, and then there was a supervisory union over all of that. So if we used a supervisory union structure and we had a supervisory union board, underneath that supervisory union board, there could be, for example, the MAUSD board that would run the elementary schools in the MAUSD district, and you'd have the Addison Northwest district, and they would run the elementary schools in the Addison Northwest district, and there would be a high school board that would run, it could be a middle high school board, could be various grades, could have K through 8 in the elementary schools, could have a middle high school board that did 6 through 12 or 7 through 12, and they would operate middle school and high school. If we went to a supervisory union structure, then Lincoln and Ripton are both in search of, they need a supervisory union. The state requirements are that there has to be a superintendent of schools for a school district. And so Ripton has recently been turned down by another school supervisory union that doesn't want them. If we were to choose a supervisory union structure, then conceivably Lincoln and Ripton and even Starksboro, should they vote to leave the MAUSD district, could rejoin under a supervisory union structure. So it's very complicated. There are many options available. And I should say as a note, at least one of the community proposals that Nate Levinson is looking at as a consultant envisions the elementary schools being operated, and then the high school kids either get choice for all of the high school kids in the MAUSD district, or some arrangement where some are sent to Middlebury and some to CVU and some remain at Mount Abe. So it's all very complicated, which is why I would like to have people talk about what's best for kids. And both the administration and the people that are afraid of what's going to happen often don't talk about. I mean, if are tiny schools the best for kids or not? Is having 200 kids at any elementary school in our district, is that a wise idea? Is having a nurse available every day, which is what the only thing I heard the superintendent talk about in terms of what's good for kids, is to have a nurse on site all day, every day. Is that really the best outlook for kids, or are there other outlooks for kids? I've gone on too long. I apologize, but I think it would be helpful to understand what the options are being considered by the merger study committee.
And I'll just add, I know that so I think this group can help to make some of that information more available to people. And it's not our committee or MASD board's committee, but I definitely think we can hear from our representatives to that committee, a summary, and also point people to resources. Our school board web pages have a link to the minutes and the recordings. The most recent one isn't up yet. I just checked. It is a lot to digest, and we might decide to encourage our board reps to advocate for an FAQ or for something to help people more clearly get info. But what I'm taking from this conversation is that it's good for us to figure out how to start communicating more about what's happening there. Coco, I see your hand up, but I don't know if that's from before or if it's another.
Just a quick question for Dave. That document that he refers to, is that available for folks to see? I know I've been trying to read and follow the minutes from the merger study committee. I unfortunately can't attend them. But
that was what I was looking for, actually, Coco, because that's exactly what Dave was talking about. And I don't see it on our website yet. So I don't know if those minutes have been posted yet, but they would be appended to the minutes. So they should be coming soon.
I was going to say that the video is up on Neat TV because I did watch the meeting. So if the minutes, I didn't see the minutes, but
I don't know if they've come out yet.
Thanks.
I have a draft of the minutes. They won't be official until the next meeting. I don't know how appropriate it is to be public with the draft.
I don't know either, but I know that plus that document plus any others that are shared should get added and shared out. So we can be sure to let people know where to find that when it is posted.
MAUSD often shares the unapproved minutes on the website shortly after the board meetings. And it would be nice as a community member for the merger studies committee to kind of keep up with that tradition. So it doesn't feel like it's such a long time in between when those minutes are posted. I think unapproved minutes are exactly what, they can say unapproved minutes on them, but it would be nice for people to be able to tune in sooner rather than later and at least read and then be able to go and watch what they would like to watch in the conversation.
Yeah, it'd be good for some staff people to do that sort of thing. I don't think I have the capability on my computer to post any minutes or, I don't know how I'd go about it, but.
Yeah, no, definitely not on your end, Dave, but I think, is it Jennifer in the central office? She usually posts the.
Yeah, but so the thing is, the minute taker is somebody with the other district. And so maybe that's something that group can figure out, like what their turnaround time is going to be and how it's going to get posted as soon as it can be, because it's somebody else her name is Glory. So
I have the draft minutes. I will respond to her and ask her when and how they might be posted.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Nancy.
I'm thinking that having more information about what the committee is doing is important, and maybe an FAQ is the way to do it. I know that one of the questions on many people's minds is this, that I think it's much easier to find agreement across the communities about the advantages of finding more ways to collaborate to save money between the two districts. I think it's easier to find agreement about that than it is to find agreement about actual merging of governance. And I'm just, one of the things I know people are wondering about is why the committee, when you look at the committee's work plan, the Merger Study Committee's work plan, it looks like they're jumping right to a plan for merging governance. And it's people are curious about why the committee wouldn't start with focusing on ways to save money through other means of collaboration short of merging governance. So I don't know if now's the time to ask Dave to respond to that, but it's certainly a question that would be part of an information campaign, a communication campaign, because a lot of people are wondering about that.
I don't know exactly how to respond to that. I mean, I think there is collaboration happening right now. We have joint football team and several other ways there's collaboration. And I don't think there's necessarily anything off the table. I think the notion is that if you have a joint high school, middle school, for example, then you get more than just a few sports collaboration. Now you get collaboration between English departments and history departments and math and so forth to deliver a comprehensive educational plan to students. I think that's behind a lot of what's going on, but probably we should talk offline about that stuff, Nancy, and not take too much of this meeting time.
Okay, great.
And I just want to add that I have a senior, and in the last 2 years, it's been really hard to create a schedule for a college-bound senior with classes just at Mount Abe. She has to do a lot of virtual high school stuff, stuff at CCV, which I would want her to do anyway, or UVM. And just to add just one little piece, I know someone came from, moved here from, is it Indonesia, and is having their kid go to CVU, and even at CVU finds that the STEM classes are so below anything they had in Indonesia that they're considering not sending them there. So, I mean, I just think in the context of the world also, it's not just about money, it's about, providing, possibly at that level, being able to provide more stuff. So anyway, just wanted to share that. But I could also somehow, add the merger study committee to our little bullet point monthly piece if I can get a really good sort of concentrated things to say. I mean, I know it's complicated, but and to put those links onto that so people could link to it also. But yeah, some kind of a concentrated, you can't get it all in there for sure. But again, the most pertinent things from each meeting possibly.
Well, I do think we have a good bit to share out in the next column, and Kristen, maybe we can make sure we're complementing each other's efforts and see what we could get from more info on the merger study committee. Erin, go ahead. Muted.
sorry. I just wanted to kind of reinforce what some other people started is, I think if we had a very succinct statement responding to the Lincoln vote and saying how the district will adjust its process to accommodate that and talk about the adjustability of the models, et cetera, just, you know, have an upfront statement, start with that. And also quickly lead into an updated financial picture and specifically how that's going to affect the timeline for the process of adopting this new plan, because that's not something that I've seen discussed. And obviously this process is taking a lot longer than the initial idea was. And just talking about if there has been a little bit of relief of pressure on the urgency of this, I think that would be a good thing to tell the community, which also may help alleviate some of the urgency. I mean, I hear that there are a lot of factors going into people deciding to leave the district, but that having a less accelerated timeline might sort of help with some of that urgency of feeling like people have to leave as well.
And just as I said before, as the budget rolls out, which is going to start happening in October, we'll see the direct, Patrick will tell us, this is what we were looking at, and now this is what we're looking at. So, but they need time to crunch all the numbers too. So I don't know, I mean, we could ask next week if he's got preliminary numbers on that, because I agree, Erin, it's really important, but I'm not sure where they are in that, they are in that process yet. But we could ask next week.
Well, this is really helpful for me, and what I like about this column idea, I think it's somebody on this call who had the idea originally. It wasn't me, but and it complementing with what Kristen puts out is that we can provide some ongoing context as well as some key bits of information, so we can start, you know, planting seeds about things that we don't necessarily need to know all the answers to, but we can let folks know that these are some of the things that are going on, and more info is coming. I don't know if I'm articulating what it is I'm trying to say, but I think we can find that sweet spot between knowing exactly all the answers and waiting till we have them to get information out, and also, you know, sharing with folks what's in process. So all of this is really good feedback to that end. Coco, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I was just curious if you or anybody on the board has had any feedback about the column, and if folks are reading it and what some takeaways are from it. I know I've talked to a few people about it, and they were like, oh, there's a regular column in the Addy Indy from the MAUSD board. So yeah, I'm just curious if you've had any feedback from the community about the last few. I think we've had 3 that have gone out, right?
Yep, I think we just put out our 4th. Not about the column specifically, which, I mean, maybe Kim can speak to this more than I can. In some ways, that might be good news, because we usually hear when it's not well received, but that doesn't mean people are even noticing it. But what we're doing with that content is not just putting it in the Addison Independent, but it's getting sent out in other channels as well, almost, you know, pretty much verbatim. And people do seem to be tuning into that content. So, you know, it's not clear exactly how many people are only tuning into it in one way or another. I don't know if anybody else has any feedback on that.
I have feedback. People are seeing it and people appreciate it. I can't remember the numbers. I want to say there was 1,000 or 1,100 subscribers. And then there's another 1,500 copies that get sold in the district. I don't know, that the paper gave us the numbers on that, but it's, you know, if you're in a lot of places, the chances of somebody saying something are really good. And if you're not in a lot of places, the chance of them seeing it in only a few places are a lot less. So, and from a financial standpoint, it makes sense financially, because I think we did a mailing 2 years ago, and it's just so expensive to do a first class mailing to people in the community. Plus, it's just so limited. It's a single point in time. So, and as you said, Krista, I think the column sort of gives us this opportunity to articulate what's happening, get it in a format that's readable, accessible, and then share it out across, excuse me, share it out across a lot of different platforms. So, it seems to be working, and it's, as you said, usually if something isn't, you usually hear about it. As somebody said way back, I think it was my husband said this to me when we were doing the meetings, and people would say, oh, I didn't hear about that, or I don't know about that. And his comment was, at some point, people really need to own their own disengagement. If they're not paying attention, if they're not reading the paper, or they're not looking at their town's front porch forum, that's a decision that people make to, you know, I'm a community person, so I spend a lot of time doing those things, but not everybody is. So all you can do is find as many places as possible to have that information, to reach as many different people as you can.
Absolutely. You know, just one point I was thinking is I too am a community person. So I feel like I get information overload in terms of knowing what's going on. But, you know, I'm the librarian in Bristol, and we do have a fair amount of patrons that don't have access to email regularly or Front Porch Forum, and don't get a paper at home. They might come to the library and read the paper, but we do have a, you know, public board where we post the select board minutes and the meetings, and those are frequented by a small group of folks, but they're useful. And so I just wonder if at some point we want to consider any kind of public posting of the material.
Yeah, we could invite different offices or libraries or select boards to print out and post if they're able to. You know, it's usually got a nice header and a color header. So yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely encourage some town offices and libraries to do that. I think that's a good idea. Erin.
I just typed a little comment, but I also just want to say for our group that I think that sometimes being able to really be participatory means you have a lot of privilege. You have time, you don't work in the evening, you don't have multiple jobs, etc. Potentially, I'm not saying you to anyone. I'm just saying that can be being able to be engaged can mean that you have privilege, and there are a lot of people in our communities that don't have those options. And I think that we should just really think about that, like to Coco's point, a lot of people may not have internet, may not have access to Front Porch Forum, may not be able to afford a newspaper subscription, may not have gas money to drive around, or so I think that that's something that we really have to think about and challenge us to think about as we're trying to engage people. I'm not sure what strategies work best for this group to engage folks that maybe have a harder time making evening meetings or accessing the internet, but thinking about ways to really try and do outreach. And you know, I would say that one example in Starksboro, some of us have been thinking about is, you know, reaching out to folks at times where there's meal distribution for low income folks, that, you know, that is a place where people are coming and might be able to engage for a little while in a way that they wouldn't be able to in other places. And so I think that is a challenge for us as a community that's really diverse and has people living in persistent poverty, to really figure out how to best engage people. And I think one of the challenges I've felt with this process is we're doing it in the middle of a pandemic when people are more stressed than ever. And, you know, it's been 100% by Zoom, almost 100% by Zoom. And I think it's really limiting in some ways. So I just feel like that was an important thing to say. Thank you.
I'm so glad you said that, Erin. We worked for a while with Sue McCormick, really getting us thinking about district-wide engagement, and we talked often, and it's a part of our charge, is that we are seeking as diverse, or seeking to reach as diverse representation of our community as possible. And we did some things earlier on to do that work. And another reason why this committee, why it's been great to have community members and board members, is partly just capacity, building our capacity to reach people. And, we, we're at the Harvest Festival in Bristol, and we, have talked about doing, going to the dump and doing different things like that, really meeting people where they are. And you're right, the pandemic has sort of gotten us back into the Zoom group, or gotten us totally into a Zoom group. So we do need to keep thinking about that all the time.
I'm at the dump on Saturday running recycling, and I think I'll put a sign up saying, "Got any questions?" Because I'm there. I mean, not everyone knows I'm on school board, so a lot of people would do that anyway, but
I think that's something we've tried to do here in New Haven in terms of combining the church, the school groups, the library, as many touch points in as many places as our community comes together. And, we're fortunate that neighbors look out for each other, and that people, although our town is pretty spread apart, we have little neighborhoods within our community itself. And when COVID hit, we had 35 volunteers from New Haven in different parts of the town volunteering to help people during the pandemic. So we have these small groups of communities within our own community, and have found that that's really the best way to share information for us here, because I agree with what Erin was saying.
So we're at 7:42, and I do want us to start thinking about a longer range engagement plan. And I think this conversation is a good sort of touch point around that, in terms of our need to make sure as a board we are going out deliberately to folks and sharing what our organizational goals are. So what do we want graduates of Mount Abe to know and to be able to do to be successful in the world? And kind of road testing what we think that should look like in terms of what we've set out as organizational goals, and asking, a variety and really diverse representation of our community. Kristen and Don were both on boards back when we were supervisory union, and we had the individual elementary school boards and the high school board. And I think they were, at least one or both of them were part of the one or several of the boards that did this, where they went out and connected with local business leaders, with folks working in human services, with alumni, with a variety of different people, not just about the current issues at hand in the district, but really about, this is where we're steering our ship toward. Does this make sense as an organization? Do these goals seem relevant and pertinent? And so I don't think I have it in me to really dive into that conversation right now, but I want to make sure we don't forget about it. This was our first time coming back together again after a few months. And I think it's important for us to kind of reset and to share and process about what's going on right now. But heads up, because it will be on our agenda, and perhaps at the top of the agenda when we next meet, thinking bigger picture, making sure that we're staying connected to our community, and that what we ask of our district leaders is leading our students and graduates to a place that our whole community agrees is where they should be headed. So we started this conversation at our board retreat, did a little bit of brainstorming about different groups we might want to reach out to hear from and to get their perspective on our goals. But that's the work I'd like to do more with this group and to flesh out a little bit more. Nancy.
That's important work. And just as it's true that one way of looking at that work is the board reaching out to the community, another way of looking at it, equally important, is setting up the structures that enable the owners, the community's voices to be heard. And that is why school councils are a really important vehicle to consider, because that is, they can do that in so many different ways. They really foster that kind of communication. And I hope we can take that up soon.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, so I'm going to assume that nobody minds terribly if we end 14 minutes early. But I will just take a pause and see if anyone has anything they want to add or comment on, something that's on their mind that we didn't talk about or that we did talk about. Margie.
Yeah, I would just like to make some comments since I was visiting here for the first time. And
Yeah,
I'd like
please.
One is that I appreciate what everyone's doing to try to get information out to the community. It's so important. And I really like the idea of clarifying and trying to put out the different alternatives that the mergers committee is considering. I think that would be extremely helpful. I found what Dave said about wanting to work toward a positive goal, really, that would be in the best of all possible worlds. Of course, that would be the way to go. I'm concerned, and I guess I've always been concerned, and a lot of people are in Starksville, about the difference between repurposing and closing. And that's something that could be clarified. And I think there would be a lot more trust in the community if people thought they would be able to have a vote whether or not the school was going to be repurposed or not. And I think that's one of the things that has led to a lot of fear among the community. So if that could be addressed in a positive and straightforward and honest way, that might do a lot to repair trust, if that can be done. And maybe it can't be, because maybe there really is a kind of a rupture there and will just have to be played out. I don't know. I really liked Nancy's idea of the school council. So I hope that's something that would be followed up on so that the communities would feel they have a voice within their community. And I know with the pandemic, it's been so hard for that to happen. But those were the main things I think that I wanted to touch on. So thank you very much for allowing me to participate. I appreciate what you're trying to do.
Thank you.
And I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, we had started really digging into those. And then obviously the school district had to pivot. And now it's gone on so long that I agree, we need to address that. And I think no one imagined that we'd still be where we are now. But I agree that this is an endemic now and we have to move on, even despite maybe having to do a bunch more Zoom meetings. And people were complaining to me about that. And I said, dude, there's nothing I can do about that. It's not our fault. Sorry. So anyway, but you're absolutely right. We need to do those. And despite the fact that we've got a lot on our plate.
Okay, well, I think that my next step will be to write out some of the things we talked about for our next communication and share that around with all the various folks. So we'll get that going as soon as we can. And if after this meeting you think of something else that you want us to consider adding into that, please let me know. And unless there's nothing else, then I will just say thanks everybody for being here and sticking with us, and I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Great. All those in favor of adjourning at 7:51? I'm going to assume we're all good. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, Krista.
Take care.
Thank you.